Hi everyone, welcome to Game Dev Happy Hour. I am Jeremy Lam, the presenter for tonight. I am from Pixio. So before I get into my talk, no money, no problem, and I'm here to share about how to start your first game, how to make your first game and launch your first game with absolutely no capital at all. A short introduction about myself. I joined the game industry back in 2012, so almost 10 years now. Back then, mobile games were very easy. Basically, you just have to make something, anything really. You just put it out there, and you will probably make pretty good money just by doing that. I remember getting I was working at my previous studio, we got like millions of downloads with almost zero marketing. So basically, the game just existed. That's basically it. Of course, the game kind of hit a niche market, but then most games could have survived back then, to no marketing. And then afterwards, I started Pixio back in 2015 with other partners, 6 people in total. We released 7 games so far, over 21 million downloads and counting. We are currently developing our 8th and 9th simultaneously. So our capacity kind of grew over the years. So why do I want to give this talk? Why do I want to talk about this? It's because I personally been through the exact same thing, and not just me. A lot of my colleagues and my partners went through the same thing before we formed a team, and we all kind of longed for doing our own thing, kind of setting up our own studio and making our own games the way we want to make it. And I'm pretty sure a lot of game developers out there want to do this too, and that's why I want to share the stuff that I've learned along the way. It also came from after a lot of traveling the last prior to COVID. I talked to a lot of developers over the world, not just in Hong Kong, but in China, in Taiwan, in the US, and in the UK. A lot of up and coming developers have these questions and oh, what should I do if I'm already in a job? What should I do if I want to make my own game? Should I do this? Should I do that? They might be in a really big studio and they want to kind of replicate what they're doing in a big studio, and it kind of doesn't work like that, and a lot of frustration there. So I want to just go through this and see what I can share with everybody. So tip 0 actually is to actually get money first if you can. Now I know this is very counter to the title of the presentation, but for some people, not all people, definitely a minority of people, they might already have resources available to them, maybe from their family, from friends, or maybe some companies that they work in would offer deals like this. And to have these kind of opportunities, I think you should take it, because creating games for a living is really, really difficult. It's really hard. It's hard enough. You shouldn't give in to your ego. You should definitely not increase the difficulty of doing this, because I believe there's no honor in hardship for the sake of hardship. It should be, if you respect the difficulty of making a game, you should try to put your full efforts into it, which is to give it a full-time effort. So quit your job, quit whatever you're doing, do it full-time. I think that's the best way to do it. But of course, this talk is about no money, no problem. So what if you don't have money? If this opportunity is not available to you, if your family or your company or your friends cannot spare you, or if you cannot save up enough for yourself, you might want to work a full-time job and make games in your time, which is the main focus of my presentation. So first tip is to try to think more and work less, because a lot of you, not all of you, but a lot of people, including myself, when I was trying to make my own games while working for another studio, it was very tiring, because first of all, coming up with a good concept is very difficult, and you feel like you have so many games you want to make, like so many great ideas that you have, and picking one to do is very, very difficult. Trying to sit in front of your computer after 8 hours of work, 9 hours of work every day is very, very difficult. So the first thing you should do is try to work less, try to not be in front of your computer, and just go about your life, like experience the world, live your life, go out, play games, watch movies, read books. Try to spend less time in front of the computer and try to consume more content and do stuff that makes you happy. Only if an idea pops up in your head, only if something that's very tangible that pops up in your head and something that really triggers your imagination and you start to flow, that's when you sit down in front of a computer and write it all down or draft your mock-ups or code it in Unity or whatever. That's when you sit down and do it. If you're just staring at the computer for hours on end with nothing being done, but you feel guilty not doing that, you really should get away from the computer and do something else first. You want to not be burnt out. You want to have the ability to keep doing this, because by doing this part-time, it might take you a lot longer than it normally would. So the sustainability of the state is very important. And don't feel guilty that you're not sitting in front of a computer. Now, of course, this way of thinking is more for thinkers, for game designers. If you're an artist, if you're an engineer, if you're a tinkerer, you probably won't do this. Like, you want to get your hands dirty, you want to start drawing, you want to start coding. I have another tip for you guys. Get partners. Getting partners is very important in going this alone, especially if you're going with no capital. You can't hire anybody. You probably can't really outsource anything. You probably can't buy tons of them. You can't probably buy like high quality ones. So don't go at it yourself. If you're a tinkerer, that means you need to sit in front of a computer after a full day of work. You need to sit down in front of a computer during weekends, and it's just very tiring. So getting someone to go along this journey with you is very, very important. I know people would say things like, oh, but all these other studios did it. Team Cherry did it for Hollow Knight. The Super Meat Boy guys did it. But they're already very experienced, first of all. Their art and programming and everything is, superb. Their skills are superb. On top of that, it's a survivorship bias, right? So they're the really, really talented ones. They're like the 1 in 1,000 developers, right? It's not very productive or very, it doesn't make a lot of sense just to copy the way they do things. Just because they can do it doesn't mean everyone can. But once you get a couple of partners, you motivate each other. That brings me to the next point. Try to use a project management software like Trello, which is free, or other Kanban softwares. And so Kanbans are the ones that I'm showing on screen right now. So you see columns, there's stuff that you do, stuff you're doing, stuff that needs checking or testing, and then the tasks are done. And when you have this software set up, have a routine with your team and stick to it. So let's say you meet every Saturdays. Either you meet in person or online. You meet a certain fixed time in your schedules, and that would keep you guys focused on the timeline. So when you have these meetings, you can talk about what you did, after the last meeting, stuff that you said you were going to do. Did you do it? How was it? Did you meet were there any difficulties? Do you need anything from anyone else? And also talk about what to do in the next cycle, right? What am I going to achieve? What is everyone going to achieve before the next meeting? You can take your time with this. It could be daily. If you're very hardcore, it could be weekly or monthly. But as long as everybody is working towards something, and having those meetings would really, really help and keep you on track. Also, you can always, bounce ideas off of each other before you start attempting to do these tasks. And that will definitely help, because it would, weed out a lot of miscommunications or set the standard for how things will fit together. And next tip, be very, very aware of your limitations. But of course, most people don't listen to this tip. When you're doing your first game, if you're an engineer, or especially if you're not an engineer and you're trying to do the programming yourself, try not to make any technological innovations in your game. Try to stick to the tech libraries that already exist and probably is popular and it's not in beta. So don't use the newest Unity version. Don't use brand new libraries that no one ever used. Try to find things that are popular so that there's a lot of Stack Overflow resources that you can look at, a lot of example games or example code you can look at. That would definitely ease you into the process if you're not already a very seasoned engineer. If you're an artist, definitely find an art style that you're comfortable with and be very aware of the scope, because often artists are the ones who kind of are the bottleneck. They have to create a lot of art for their games. Try to have an art style that you're comfortable with making a lot of stuff for, so you can easily change or remove art from your game if there's changes in design or whatnot. Don't be afraid to change your stuff. You're probably going to be working with a game designer who's not very experienced, or an engineer who's not very experienced, and they might have requirements for your artwork that you guys didn't know beforehand. And when you put our stuff together, you might have to redo a lot of stuff. So make sure it's you communicate and don't be afraid to redo your stuff. If you're a game designer, very aware of the genre you're designing for. As a designer, you also have to be very aware of your team's limitations. What are your engineers' experiences? What are your artists' experiences when designing your game so you don't go way over an intended scope? Which brings me to the next point. Designing games that are action focused or that are UI focused. So this is a problem that I see a lot that happened to me, that happened to a lot of other developers, because games that mainly rely on UIs to establish gameplay are quite difficult to do. Now they seem very easy to do because it's all UI and it feels like a lot less work, but the work doesn't really lie in the creation of the game, but it lies into the explanation of the game, the tutorial of the game, and the UX and UI designs of the game. In order to do a game like this, you have to be a designer or artist that has a very keen sense of UI and UX. The button pop, like it should be very intuitive. Information shown on screen needs to be exactly at where they need to be. And I see a lot of people struggle when they feel like their game is completed and they put it out and the stats make no sense and the retention is really low. People are dropping off even at the tutorial. That's when I know like a UI heavy game is kind of difficult to do, because versus games like Arch Hero on the left, it's often a game with very minimal UI and there's a huge start button, a huge enter button. You click that, you get into the main gameplay, and the game is self-explanatory kind of. And you see a character, you're the character, you have a button, the character moves. It's all very intuitive to the user. So if you're not super experienced in designing like UI-based games and you're going into your first game, try to do something that's more intuitive. Try to do something that's self-explanatory. Games like Arch Hero, like action games or driving games or runners, those kind of games are a lot easier to explain to the user on what's really going on. And you save a lot of time in designing your tutorial and designing UIs and stuff like that. And my next tip is try to design from the back of the game to the front of the game, but develop it from the front to the back. So what do I mean by that? In order to create a game that can be played for a long time with a very low budget, the core loop needs to be both fun and very, very repeatable. So there needs to be something very core, very simple to do. Once you created it, people can keep playing that, and you can easily add variety to that. That people can keep playing, and they won't feel bored, doing the same thing over and over again. So you have to ask yourself, if you are the player of your own game, what are you going to do after you finish all the content and you finish all the main progression? What happens when you're in late game? What happens when you're in end game? What are you doing day in and day out? Why are you coming back every day? If you can nail this, then your game is going to have a lot longer retention, and you're probably going to make a lot more money and have way happier clients, happier audiences. And when you also do this, when you go from the back to the front and develop from front to back, you also kind of define your scope, because the end game is the scope. Everything that happens during the end game is the scope of the product. So once you do that, then it is less likely that you have scope creep, because if you start from the beginning and you keep adding, there's really no ends to like what you can add to your game. But if you like, this is the end game, this is what I'm going to do every day, and I'm going to develop all this thing, design all this thing, and then I'm going to develop from front to back. So what do I mean from developing from front to back? So you've designed your end game. You designed everything that happens when everyone finished all the content. You basically have to develop the game, right? So you want to go in and develop the core loop first. You want to develop the core loop such that, like, for example, if you're doing a game like Arch Hero, you want to develop the movements of the character. You want to be able to control it, move it around, have a couple of test levels, and start doing that, right? That's part of the core loop, right? And then you probably add in 4 more levels, and so you can create a world, so you can play from like the first stage to like 30th stage, for example. And then you're going to add in the skills in between, right? The skills that you can pick up in between. So you're going to add those. And then once you have those, then you can play it from start to finish, stage 1 to stage 30, and pick up skills in between and have that roguelike gameplay. And then you build the support structure, right? But Most people would start building the support structure, but what I like to do is to just develop the tutorial first. So once you develop the tutorial and you have the core loop working, then you can just give it to your friends and try it out, right? You give it to people, you can start a Discord group, you can get users, you can have play testers to test out the game because you can just hand it to them, watch them play. You don't have to explain anything. If you're more savvy, if you have some budget, if you have a little bit of budget that you can spend, you can actually put it up on Google Play or itch.io. You can buy some users for your game, or post on Reddit, post on social media. So some people will come play your game and they get just start from the beginning. So that's why you want to develop from the beginning to end, because you want to design something really good at the end, but start from the beginning so people can start trying out. A lot of times I've seen these huge games with many system design, but there's no tutorial. And once they put in the tutorial and test it out, they see a huge drop off right at the beginning of the game. That means people aren't even playing your core game, let alone all the other supporting features of your game. Next tip, try to develop a game that is client only game. So no servers, no online. People can just download and start playing your game. Without a server, that means there's no servers, no server costs, no server issues, less bugs, a lot less development time, a lot less skill involved, and a lot less people involved. So you probably can go from like 2 engineers to 1 engineer just by doing this. And because this is your first game that you're kind of going at it yourself, you might change a lot of stuff. You might make mistakes, and you might want to go back and fix things and change things and drastically change things. By having a server, that means whatever you do in the game, whatever you make in the game, there's 2 sets of code written. And every time when you change stuff, then you have to change it on both sides. Not all changes will kind of cause you to change your server code, but when you do, it's a lot more troublesome. So I kind of try to urge people to start your first game to be a solo single player only game, so that you can reap those benefits. All my games, all the games that Pixio does, that Pixio launched so far, are all single player only games. So I can attest to the fact that they can make money. People often ask me, don't people always hack your games? Yes, they do, but it's a minority. And those who will play and pay for your game, they will do it regardless. So you might not make as much money as a server game, but if your team is only 2-3 people, it's definitely going to be enough. If anyone wants to learn more about making games with no servers, PM me afterwards. I'll post my Discord and email after this presentation. Next tip, try to consider getting a publisher. Now, first, a disclaimer. Pixio is a publisher, and we're always looking for mobile games to publish. So if you have a game that looks really nice and you're very interested in looking for a publisher, definitely talk to me after the presentation. Sorry for the shameless plug, but let me go in. I want to talk about this because I want a lot of people ask me if they should find a publisher, and let me kind of explain, the thinking behind whether you should get a publisher or not. Because definitely when I started, I really, really wanted a publisher because I just didn't know how to do anything. In my previous company, I kind of dabbled in, marketing a little, but our marketing changes so quickly. The requirements for it, the cost for it changes so quickly that if you haven't done it for like a year or so, things change a lot. So let me go for the non-publisher route first. Let's talk about that first. So if you're going at it alone, and mind you, I'm talking about mobile games only. If you're going at it alone, solo, indie, small team, you want to get your game featured by Apple and Google, because that would bring you a lot of users up front and hopefully a lot of income as well. And it is a huge chunk of change. It probably won't be life-changing, but it will probably pay for the cost or the time that you did for the first game, and it might set you up for your next game. So in order to do this, when you think your game is ready, when you're wrapping up your game and the core gameplay is done and a lot of the features is done, a lot of the polishing is in, it looks and feels competent, you can talk to a lot of the more established devs in this chat or in Hong Kong. They would often be very eager to introduce you to the app store managers of your area. Note that if your studio is in Hong Kong, if you are in Hong Kong, then they kind of require you to talk to the App Store manager in Hong Kong. Now, there's one thing very special about being in Hong Kong is that there's not a lot of developers in Hong Kong, but Hong Kong has a dedicated App Store manager. So the App Store manager to developer ratio is probably like less than 1 to 100. Whereas if you're in China or in US, the manager to developer ratio is probably 1 to 1,000 plus, right? So they'll probably give you a lot of attention. They'll be really eager to try out your game. They're really eager to talk to you and learn more about your studio. The managers in Hong Kong are very nice. Slam from Apple and Jennifer from Google Play are really nice people. They'll definitely help you out if your game is competent, of course. When you do launch your game like this, no marketing budget, just putting it online and having them feature you, you'll probably make anywhere between, worst case, a couple $1,000s, Hong Kong dollars, to millions of Hong Kong dollars or more. I think I witnessed a couple of 2 to 3 hits this year from Hong Kong. That's the only thing they did with a little bit of marketing. But the main thing was the feature, and that netted them like over $2-3 million, which is quite nice if they're a small team. But however many users you could get from the feature, it depends on a lot of things. Did you get a today feature? Did you get a banner? Did you just get an icon feature? What is the natural virality of the game? Do people share? Do they really, really love the game and they love talking about it? That all kind of goes into whether your game is, very popular at the point of the feature. So that's kind of that. And there's really not much you can do until you feature it because, no money, right? So until you feature it, until you wait 2-3 months until the money comes back from if you put ads in your game or if the money is coming from in-app purchases, the money will take, 2 to 3 months to come back. So you gotta have to wait that out a bit. Now, what happens if you go with a publisher? So if you go with a publisher, then in the best cases, they will give you a minimum guarantee, which is basically a lump sum of cash up front. But a lot of them these days don't really offer MGs anymore. Unless they take your game and test it and it performs really well, then they'll try to give you an MG because they want to entice you and not have you run off to a different publisher with a better offer. But because of how crowded the marketplace is, of however many freemium mobile games are coming out every day, the chance of having a very high performing game is very low. They often require you to score a 40% or more on your day one retention. So that's however many players came back on the second day of your game after the first day. Some will require even a 7-day retention of like upwards of like 15-20%, and maybe even revenue numbers, like what is your average revenue per user, all that. And this is the dilemma, right? Most people are like, if I'm already scoring that kind of numbers, can't I just publish myself? Yes, if you can score those kind of numbers and you go the self-published route and you get featured, you probably make millions. The thing is not just the launch, right? When you go with a publisher, most publishers don't really care about the launch. They don't really care about the huge sum coming in from the launch. They often care about the sustainability of your game. So how long can I market this? 4 or 5 years, and I can keep purchasing users for this game. I can keep marketing this game, and the developer can get paid on a monthly basis so they can keep upgrading this game and update and put in more content and just maintaining this game such that in the end, they'll make a lot more money. So let's say your launch is a couple $1 million. They're looking at maybe tens of millions of dollars. So the scale is, very different. Publisher will and should deal with all the marketing, from all the materials to the marketing budget, to scaling it, to the bidding strategies, which ad networks to bid on, what other forms of marketing, do you have would they run your community? Would they run your customer service? Would they do, social posts for you? All that would need to be discussed. And of course, more competent, publishers would want to do all that for you because they already have professional expert people in place to do all those things for you. And mostly will ask you for, your assets, or if you're like, maybe they want your characters to pose a certain way, they will ask you to draw like different versions of your character. That's the most they'll ask of you. Often they'll take a cut. Well, of course they'll take a cut after they've recouped their minimum guarantee. The cut is often starts at 50-50, and depending on what you want from the publisher or what kind of minimum guarantees you want, they'll scale the slider according to that. But that's often not the real question. The real question is whether you and your team want to become a publisher in the future? Like, do you want to learn to become a publisher and eventually really publish your own games, and not just self-publish as in, just putting it out there, but like marketing it and kind of sustaining it and doing all the customer support and doing all the social posts and doing all the analytics and all that? If you really want to build a company and if you really want to build like a culture with many, many roles in your company, then you should self-publish and learn to do that on your own, even if it's a very small scale. Even you go the self-publish route, you put your game out there, you launch it, you get a feature, wait a couple of months. When the money comes back, you start reinvesting that money into the game, start buying some Facebook ads, learn online and see what are the best practices, start creating ads for it, bid a little bit on Facebook, bid a little bit on Google, and see what the returns are like, see what kind of players that you can get, what kind of money are they paying you, are you ROI positive, what is the margins like, right? But that's a whole mountain of knowledge that you have to learn. So unless you really, really want to do this and you really are passionate about doing this, I would say don't do that and just go with a publisher. Also, if you want to really become a developer, like if you want to become a very good game designer or engineer or artist, and you want to focus on your craft, you should also find a publisher. Because if you're just going to, do a half-assed job at publishing your game, you might as well give it to someone else. And I can almost guarantee you that you will make more money with a competent publisher than, going at it yourself, because the sustainability of your game is very important. Because you want to, these are the two cases that can happen. The first case is you make your first game, you put it out there, it makes a lot of money, the first month, millions of dollars, $1 or $2 million, and you're very happy. The three of you are really happy. So, and you have all these ideas that you want to do now. So you all quit your jobs and you all put all that money back into the next game. And because of all the money you made, you're like, okay, this next game is going to be awesome. I'm going to do this kind of art style. I'm going to do this kind of game design. I'm going to add all these features to it. But then you have a limited runway, right? Because your game only lasted a couple of months. So that cash is all that you had. And then after a year or two, you find out, oh, your money is running low. Your second game is nowhere near on being finished. And you start to panic, right? And you launch your second game, but it's not done. It's rushed like Cyberpunk, and you don't make any money from it. And then that's the end of your studio, right? That's the first case. The second case is you find a publisher or you self-publish. You start, buying people for your game, and you start getting this cash flow from your game monthly. That monthly cash flow is more than enough to cover the salaries, a very basic salary of your founders, right? Then you can start to think about, okay, can I hire someone to maintain my old game? Can we just, focus on the old game and just keep on updating it such that my users are happy and I can focus on this game and add the features I really want to add. This more sustained way of developing games is a lot more safer and is a lot more, allows you to try riskier things. Because if the cash flow coming in is positive every month, let's say you do spend 2 years on your next game. Even after 2 years, your runway isn't probably going to go down. It probably might go up even. You might have even more money in the bank if you go this route. So really think about that when you get there. So shameless plug, we are a publisher. We offer minimum guarantees. We really like to work with developers, very early on in the development cycle. We don't like to if your game is done, then we'll just test it. I don't like to do that. We really like to get our hands dirty early on in the game and offer our expertise on, design, marketing, or even art, very early on. And we are very focused on helping you build a sustainable game and not just to make a quick buck. And we really enjoy learning with the developers. So, we might try new things together. We might, make some mistakes together along the way. It might be me. It might be you. It might be me. But, I really enjoy learning with the developers. And that's it for my presentation.
For people who like to be solo developers, one that they would prefer doing the art program design themselves and don't really have interest in getting partners, how would you suggest they follow your third tip, which is finding these task management software?
My tip would be join a group of developers. I know there's another group hosted by Simon Butt. He is the group that he hosts has a lot of solo devs in it, and they often meet every like 2 weeks and just talk about their games. They can just share what they're doing, and I think having outlets to kind of show off what you're doing and get any kind of feedback for it is very important. I think the important part isn't having a partner per se, but it's more like having feedback, to not just like be in a cave yourself and working on your own thing yourself. Share it, like show people what you're doing and get people involved, so you kind of get feedback from it. So you don't feel like you're just working for months on end and having no sight of how things are going. Another thing is, if you're working alone, that means the manpower is very limited. That means you're designing, coding, and buying or doing the art. That means your scope needs to be very, very limited. And actually have another tip here. A lot of the solo devs that I meet, they often come from a developer background. They often come from like a programmer background, most of them, or they're trying to learn to be a programmer. Well, that's kind of like has to be the case, right? So what they often do is they would go in and they would do something that makes them feel productive, because everyone wants to feel productive, right? So what they'll do is, because they're already a developer with some experience, they will go in and say, for example, if I want to do a racing game, and they'll go in and have this idea for this really complicated, very sophisticated, physics engine, or this physics system that they want to add, and they'll go ahead and spend weeks and months on that. My suggestion is, you really need to focus on the concept of the game and the core loop of the game, and not on some tech that you may or may not need later, because that is when people start to feel like they want to feel productive. They want to, like, after a weekend of working alone, they want to feel like they've accomplished something. But most of the time, the design part of the game is very unrewarding, and you do a lot and you throw away a lot. But that's the important stuff. That's the stuff that makes your game innovative. It's often not some niche tech or niche whatever that would make your game stand out. It's the design. So make sure that you're focusing on the design, and make sure that you're sharing your design to people and getting feedback for it.
Can I add a bit on that part though?
Sure.
I think, as a designer perspective, it's very important to test your game a lot. And if you always use like kind of assets or technologies that already have been used in a certain manner, then you are not going to create something new, and then you're going to have the issue that there are like, you're one out of thousands. So I think that is also an issue with, if you're making the same of similar games, then it's even harder to get it like good in a remarkable way promoted. Of course, you have a different story and a different immersive experience, but if you say it like that, it sounds a bit like, yeah, just reskin a game that already works. That's how I felt a bit about that comment, which I don't really agree with, to be honest.
Oh, no. Definitely not reskin. Reskinning a game or copying a game is the worst thing you can do for your first game. Like, it's the worst. Unless you're doing it just to learn how to make a game. Unless you're doing that, do not do that. Do not copy, do not reskin. That is the worst. When I talk about innovative tech, let me use my friend's example. She wanted to do a turn-based strategy game, like something like Final Fantasy Tactics. I want to do something like that. And then I talked to her about it, and I asked her, what's special about your game? And she's like, oh, my game is going to have the system that I'm going to have, that I can update maps over the internet. So she can put up different map designs and different level designs on the servers, and users can automatically pull new stages without downloading a brand new game or a brand new package from the app stores. My feedback was like, yes, but that doesn't really provide much. That doesn't necessarily provide you with a brand new experience, right? Whereas if you just made something offline and you just made something like on the client side, but that level design is very special, or the game design is very intricate, or like there's strategies in it, that's where your game would shine, right? That's when users would feel like there's a difference. I don't think less experienced people have this problem, but more experienced people kind of, when they go from a big company to doing it alone, they might carry some of these thinkings over. because often when you're a big company, you have to think about, not just, 1,000 DAUs. You're thinking about hundreds of thousands of DAUs, and what happens when they all have to like update the game at the newest level? Isn't it better to just send them levels over the internet without downloading a whole new package and doing all that? Yes, I understand. So yeah, thank you for your question.